Royal Guard gets a strange feeling about a giant tourist stays alert when he did this. The autumn breeze rustled through Officer Daniel Carter's perfectly pressed uniform as he maintained his stoic position outside the palace. After 7 years of service as a Royal Guard, he had developed an uncanny ability to read people. Tourists with their excited chatter and endless selfies, locals hurrying past with practiced indifference, and the occasional troublemaker trying to provoke a reaction from the famously unmoving guards. But today was different. Something about the man sitting on the bench across the plaza made the hairs on the back of Carter's neck stand up. At first glance, the tourist's most striking feature was his height. Even seated, he towered over the other visitors, his broad shoulders and long limbs making the standard wooden bench seem almost comically small. Carter estimated he must be well over 6.5 feet tall. Unlike the bustling crowds around him, the man sat perfectly still, his attention focused entirely on the bench beneath him. Through years of training, Carter had mastered the art of observing without appearing to move his eyes. He watched as the giant's large hands moved methodically across the wooden slats of the bench, his fingers tracing patterns with deliberate precision. No camera hung around his neck, no map poked from his pockets, and no companion chatted by his side, all unusual traits for a tourist in this location. "Excuse me, sir. Would you mind taking our picture?" A young couple approached the giant, holding out their smartphone with hopeful smiles. The man barely acknowledged them, offering only the slightest shake of his head before returning to his careful examination of the bench's surface. Carter felt his pulse quicken slightly. In his experience, tourists came to Buckingham Palace for 3 main reasons: to photograph the magnificent building, to watch the changing of the guard, or to share the experience with loved ones. This man seemed interested in none of these things. As the morning wore on, Carter observed more peculiarities. The giant remained seated for exactly 47 minutes. Carter had checked his watch twice. During this time, the man's behavior followed a distinct pattern: 10 minutes studying the left side of the bench, 15 minutes on the middle section, and 22 minutes on the right side. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, as if he were following an invisible blueprint. The crowds ebbed and flowed around him, some tourists casting curious glances his way, others completely oblivious to his presence. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip passed by, their excited chatter and pointing fingers directed at the palace guards momentarily drawing Carter's attention. When he looked back, the giant had shifted his position slightly, and Carter caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a calculated awareness that seemed entirely at odds with his tourist facade. The man's clothing was equally puzzling. His attire was carefully chosen to blend in, a gray windbreaker, dark jeans, and comfortable walking shoes, yet everything seemed too new, too clean, as if purchased specifically for this visit. No worn edges, no comfortable creases that came from regular wear. It was the kind of detail that most would miss, but to Carter's trained eye, it spoke volumes. A sudden gust of wind swept across the plaza, sending newspapers and fallen leaves skittering across the ground. Several tourists clutched at their hats and scarves, but the giant remained unmoved, his fingers continuing their methodical exploration of the bench's surface. Carter noticed how his movements became more focused whenever the crowds thinned, as if he were taking advantage of moments of relative privacy. The giant's face remained impassive throughout his inspection, but Carter caught fleeting moments when his expression would change, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a subtle tightening of the jaw, particularly when his fingers found certain spots on the bench. These micro-expressions lasted mere seconds, but to Carter, they were like red flags waving in his peripheral vision. As the morning drew to a close, the giant's behavior shifted. His movements became more cursory, less focused, as if he were now simply going through the motions for appearance's sake. Carter watched as the man checked his watch, a simple digital model, nothing flashy, and began preparing to leave. The departure was as methodical as everything else. The giant stood slowly, his full height now even more impressive. He took a moment to stretch, his actions seeming natural to any casual observer, but Carter noticed how this movement allowed him to scan the entire plaza in a smooth 180-degree sweep. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Carter felt a jolt of recognition, not of the man's identity, but of his training. Those were the eyes of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and precisely how to find it. Without a word, without a single photograph, without any of the typical tourist behaviors, the giant merged into the flowing crowd. His height made him easy to track for several moments, but he seemed to know exactly how to use the morning rush to his advantage. He weaved through groups of tourists with surprising grace for someone of his size, each movement precisely calculated to take him further from Carter's line of sight. Within minutes, he had vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but questions and an uneasy feeling in Carter's gut. As a royal guard, he had been trained to trust his instincts, and right now, every one of them was telling him that what he had just witnessed was far from a simple tourist visit. As his shift continued, Carter found his eyes repeatedly drawn to that bench. From his position, he could see nothing unusual about its surface, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred right under his nose. The giant's methodical inspection, his careful timing, his strategic departure, it all pointed to something more, something planned. Yet protocol demanded he maintain his post, his exterior remaining as impassive as ever while his mind raced through the implications of what he had observed. As the day wore on, that single question kept nagging at him: what could be so interesting about a simple wooden bench outside the palace that would warrant such careful, methodical attention from someone so clearly trained in covert observation? Little did Carter know, the answer to that question would soon shake the very foundations of London's security establishment, and the giant tourist would prove to be merely the first piece of a much larger and more dangerous puzzle. The next morning arrived with a thick London fog that seemed to wrap Buckingham Palace in a mystical shroud. Officer Daniel Carter arrived early for his shift, his mind still preoccupied with the strange events of the previous day. As he approached his post, he found himself drawn to the bench where the giant tourist had spent those calculated 47 minutes. In the pale morning light, something caught his eye, a detail so subtle it would have been invisible to anyone not specifically looking for signs of tampering. There, carved into the wooden slat where the giant's fingers had lingered longest, was a symbol. Carter's breath caught in his throat as he examined it more closely. The marking was unlike any typical graffiti he'd encountered in his years of service. This was precise, almost architectural in its execution, a series of interconnected lines forming what appeared to be a geometric pattern, no larger than a coin. The cuts were clean and professional, suggesting they were made with a specialized tool rather than a pocket knife or key. "Control room, this is Officer Carter." He spoke quietly into his radio. "I need to report a security concern at checkpoint B7. Within minutes, a plainclothes security team arrived, their casual attire belying their rapid response training. They photographed the symbol from multiple angles, took measurements, and carefully collected trace evidence from the cuts in the wood. Carter noticed how their initial skepticism quickly transformed into focused concern as they worked. "I need access to yesterday's CCTV footage," Carter requested, knowing that time could be critical. In the palace's underground security center, he watched the previous day's events unfold from multiple angles. The giant tourist's actions took on new significance as they reviewed the footage frame by frame. "Stop there," Carter pointed at the screen. "Look at his hand position." The footage clearly showed the moment when the giant's fingers lingered over what would later be revealed as the carved symbol's location. But something else caught Carter's attention. The tourist's other hand had remained in his pocket, moving slightly, suggesting he was operating some kind of tool. The security analysts ran the symbol through their database, and the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically when matches began appearing on their screens. The first hit came from the British Museum. An identical marking had been discovered etched into a marble bench 2 years ago, just days before the museum's security systems had been compromised in what was later classified as a sophisticated cyber attack. "This isn't random," the head analyst declared, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The symbol found at the museum was initially dismissed as vandalism, but look at this." She pulled up side-by-side comparisons of both markings. The measurements were identical down to the millimeter, suggesting they were made with the same tool, possibly by the same hand. Carter felt his pulse quicken as the implications began to sink in. What happened after the symbol was found at the museum? The analyst's expression grew grave as she pulled up a classified report. 3 days after the marking was discovered, the museum's security network experienced a breach unlike anything we'd seen before. The attackers didn't steal anything, they were mapping the system, learning its weaknesses. If they hadn't triggered an obscure backup protocol, we might never have known they were there. The room fell silent as this information sank in. Carter's mind raced back to the giant tourist's methodical behavior, his careful timing, the calculated way he'd surveyed his surroundings. He wasn't just feeling the bench. Carter realized aloud. He was marking it for something specific. The security team expanded their search, cross-referencing the symbol with international databases. What they found sent a chill through the room. The same marking had appeared in photographs from multiple high-security locations across Europe, each instance preceded by suspicious activity or security breaches. Look at the pattern. The analyst pointed to a timeline she'd constructed. Berlin, Madrid, Brussels, each location reported finding the symbol in a public area near their security perimeter. And in each case, her voice trailed off as she pulled up more classified reports. In each case, what? Carter pressed, though part of him already knew the answer. In each case, the symbol appeared exactly 3 days before a major security event. Berlin lost classified documents. Madrid's airport communications were compromised. Brussels. She shook her head. That one's still classified at the highest levels. Carter looked at his watch, calculating. The symbol appeared this morning. That means we have less than 72 hours to figure out what's being targeted and how to stop it. The security chief stepped forward, his face grim. Carter, I'm pulling you from regular duty. You're the only one who observed this individual firsthand. I want you working with the analysis team. Every detail you remember could be crucial. As the team mobilized around him, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something obvious. The giant tourist had been too visible, too conspicuous. If his goal was covert surveillance, why draw attention to himself with his height and unusual behavior? Unless that was exactly the point. We need to consider something. Carter spoke up, causing the room to fall silent. What if the marking isn't just a signal? What if it's meant to be found? What if making us look in one direction is exactly what they want? The security chief's phone rang, interrupting the discussion. His face darkened as he listened to the caller. You're certain? He asked, then hung up without waiting for a response. We just got word from team, he announced to the room. The symbol has been linked to at least 3 other incidents we didn't know about. Each time, it appeared in a public space, but the actual security breach occurred somewhere else entirely. Carter stared at the wooden bench visible on one of the security monitors, the morning fog still swirling around it. Somewhere in the city, a countdown had begun. They had 3 days to unravel the mystery of the giant tourist and his carved symbol before whatever he was warning them about, or planning, came to fruition. As the security team scrambled around him, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were all players in a game whose rules they didn't yet understand. The giant tourist hadn't just left a mark on a bench, he'd initiated a sequence of events that would force them to question everything they thought they knew about security, trust, and the true nature of the threats they faced. As the security team delved deeper into their investigation, the scale of what they were dealing with began to emerge like a shadow taking form in the morning mist. The conference room at headquarters had transformed into a war room, its walls covered with photographs, timelines, and maps tracking the mysterious symbol's appearances across Europe. The Berlin incident was the first confirmed sighting, explained Agent Sarah Reynolds, an intelligence analyst specializing in pattern recognition. She pointed to a photograph showing the same geometric symbol carved into a stone pillar outside a government building in Berlin's diplomatic quarter. 3 days after this marking appeared, someone accessed classified files containing details about diplomatic security protocols. The breach was so sophisticated that it took weeks to even detect it. Carter studied the Berlin photographs, noting how the symbol had been placed at precisely eye level, just like the one outside the palace. They wanted it to be found. he mused aloud. But why? The Madrid airport incident proved even more puzzling. The symbol had been discovered etched into a metal bench in Terminal 4, near the airport's main security checkpoint. Within 72 hours, the airport's entire communications system had been compromised. Flights weren't affected, but something far more valuable had been exposed: the airport's internal security communications network. Look at this. Agent Reynolds pulled up security footage from Madrid. The person who left the mark in Madrid wasn't our giant. It was a woman, elderly, using a wheelchair. She played the footage, showing how the seemingly frail woman had carved the symbol while pretending to rest her hand on the bench. Different person, same technique, identical mark. Brussels painted an even more disturbing picture. The symbol had appeared outside a military research facility, carved into a tree trunk. 3 days later, security systems throughout the facility experienced unexplained glitches. Nothing was stolen, nothing was damaged, but something had probed the facility's defenses, testing for weaknesses. It's like they're mapping vulnerabilities, Carter observed, connecting the dots. Each location, each incident, they're not random targets. They're pieces of a larger puzzle. The team had created a detailed timeline of events following each symbol's appearance. Day 1. Symbol discovered. Day 2. Unusual network activity begins. Day 3. Security breach occurs. Day 4. All traces of intrusion vanish. What troubles me, said Commander Phillips, the senior security coordinator, is the precision. These aren't opportunistic attacks. Each incident shows evidence of months of planning, yet they leave this calling card deliberately. Why announce your presence to your target? Carter's mind wandered back to the giant tourist, his methodical inspection of the bench, his calculated movements. Unless the symbol serves another purpose, he suggested. What if it's not just a marker for the attackers? What if it's also a message for someone else? The room fell silent as this possibility sank in. Agent Reynolds quickly pulled up more data on her tablet. There's something else, she said, her voice tense. We've been focusing on the major incidents, but look at these. She projected a map onto the main screen, showing dozens of smaller dots scattered across Europe. These are unconfirmed sightings of similar symbols, she explained. Most were dismissed as vandalism or coincidence, but look at the pattern. The dots formed a complex web, connecting major financial centers, government buildings, and transportation hubs. It's a network, Carter breathed, seeing it clearly now. They're not just targeting individual locations, they're mapping the connections between them. Commander Phillips leaned forward, studying the map intently. If these locations are connected, what's the end game? What are they building toward? Before anyone could respond, a junior analyst burst into the room, clutching a printout. Sir, we've found something in the deep web. There's chatter about a major operation planned for the financial district. Multiple sources mentioned something called Project Mirror. Carter felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the map again. Every confirmed symbol location was connected to a major financial center. The palace wasn't the target, it was just another point in the network. The palace marking isn't marking an attack point, he realized aloud. It's marking a connection. But a connection to what? Agent Reynolds quickly overlaid the London Financial District map onto their existing network. A pattern emerged. The palace, the museum, and 3 other locations formed a perfect pentagon around the financial district. These aren't just random points, Commander Phillips said grimly. They're creating a perimeter. Whatever Project Mirror is, it's centered on London's financial heart. The room erupted into activity as the implications became clear. Teams were dispatched to check every location within the Pentagon for similar symbols. Security at financial institutions was quietly elevated. But Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. The giant tourist, he said suddenly. He knew we were watching. He knew we'd investigate the symbol. Everything he did was deliberate, his height, his behavior, the time he spent. He wanted us to make these connections. Commander Phillips nodded slowly. But why? What's the purpose of showing your hand to your target? Before Carter could respond, Another analyst rushed in. "Sir, we've got movement. Several known cyber operatives have been spotted entering London in the past 24 hours. And there's more, we've detected unusual network activity around all 5 points of the Pentagon." The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was increasingly troubling. Whatever was coming wasn't just another security breach, it was something bigger, something that had been in motion long before the giant tourist ever sat down on that bench outside the palace. As the team mobilized to respond to this new threat, Carter found himself returning to one nagging question. In this elaborate game of cat and mouse, who was really hunting whom? The giant tourist had left them a puzzle, but was he leading them toward the danger, or away from it? The CCTV control room hummed with tension as dozens of screens displayed different angles of London's bustling streets. Officer Carter stood behind the operators, his eyes fixed on the footage showing the giant tourist's movements after leaving the palace. "There," Carter pointed to a screen showing the man walking down a narrow side street in Soho. "Follow him on camera 147. The giant's path through London seemed random at first, but Carter noticed a pattern. He would stop at specific corners, check his phone, then change direction, as if following predetermined waypoints. The team tracked his movement through the city's maze of surveillance cameras, watching as he navigated the crowded streets with practiced efficiency. "He's heading toward Covent Garden," one operator announced, switching to a new camera feed. The footage showed the giant entering a small cafe tucked away on a quiet back street, the kind of place tourists rarely found. "Zoom in on that window," Carter instructed. Through the cafe's front window, they watched as the giant met with another man, shorter, professionally dressed, with silver-rimmed glasses. The meeting lasted exactly 3 minutes. The two men appeared to exchange nothing more than a folded piece of paper, small enough to fit in a palm. "Can we get a clear shot of the other man's face?" Commander Phillips asked, leaning closer to the screen. "Negative," the operator replied. "He kept his back to all cameras. This wasn't a coincidence. He knew exactly where the blind spots were." Before the security team could mobilize to intercept either man, both had vanished into the crowded streets. But they had left behind one crucial lead: the giant's hotel booking information, captured when he checked in the previous day. "The Marlborough Hotel, room 412. Carter read from the booking details. "I'll take a team there now." 20 minutes later, Carter and a specialized tactical unit approached room 412. The hotel's security cameras showed no one had entered or left the room since early morning. Using a master key provided by management, they carefully entered the room. The space was immaculate, almost untouched, except for what had been deliberately left behind. Spread across the desk was a hand-drawn map of London, marked with intricate symbols and annotations. Some matched the marking from the palace bench, while others formed a complex pattern they hadn't seen before. "Look at this," Agent Reynolds said, examining the map. "These markings form a network, converging on the financial district. Canary Wharf is at the center of it all." Carter studied the map carefully. The giant had marked specific buildings, security camera locations, and what appeared to be network nodes throughout the financial district. But something felt off about it all. The map was too obvious, too conveniently left behind. "Check for anything else," Carter ordered. The team began a methodical search of the room. In the bathroom, they found a crumpled receipt from a coffee shop. In the closet, a single coat hanger was turned at an odd angle. Under the desk, a hotel notepad had subtle indentations from whatever had been written on the previous page. "Get forensics in here," Carter instructed. "I want everything analyzed, the map, the receipt, even the dust patterns on the furniture." As the team worked, Carter's phone buzzed with a message from headquarters. The coffee shop receipt had led them to another location, a small bookstore just outside the financial district. Security cameras had captured the giant entering the store earlier that morning. "He's leaving us a trail," Carter realized. "But is he leading us towards something or away from it?" The forensics team arrived, bringing sophisticated scanning equipment. Under ultraviolet light, the map revealed another layer of markings, invisible to the naked eye but clearly showing additional locations and connections. These new points, Agent Reynolds observed. They're all major data centers and network hubs. Whatever they're planning, it's not just about physical security, they're targeting the entire financial network infrastructure. Carter's attention was drawn to a particular marking on the map, a symbol that matched the one from the palace bench, but with a subtle difference. This one had an additional line, pointing toward a specific building in Canary Wharf. That building houses the London Internet Exchange, Commander Phillips explained, following Carter's gaze. It's one of the largest data exchange points in Europe. If someone could breach its security, they could potentially access data flowing through the entire financial district. Carter finished. Just then, another team member burst into the room. Sir, we've got movement on the street cameras. The giant, he's been spotted near Liverpool Street Station. Carter quickly organized a pursuit team, but something nagged at him. This was too easy, too convenient. The giant had been virtually invisible yesterday, yet today he was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for them to follow. Wait, Carter said suddenly, studying the map again. Look at the timing of these markings. They're not just locations, they're timestamps. He's marking when each location is most vulnerable. The team gathered around the map as Carter explained his theory. The giant wasn't just marking places, he was creating a timeline, showing when and where the real operation would take place. But which timeline is real? Commander Phillips asked. The one on the visible map, or the one hidden under ultraviolet light? Before Carter could respond, his phone buzzed again. The giant had been spotted entering the London Underground at Liverpool Street. But simultaneously, security cameras had caught someone matching his description near Tower Bridge, on the opposite side of the city. He's not working alone, Carter realized. This isn't just a chase, it's a diversion. While we're following these trails, something else is happening right under our noses. The question was, which trail would lead them to the truth, and which would lead them into a carefully laid trap? As Carter studied the map one last time, he noticed something they'd all missed, a tiny notation in the corner, written in nearly invisible ink. Not all paths lead to Rome. Some lead to mirrors. The chase was on, but Carter couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing exactly the role the giant had scripted for them in this elaborate performance. The real question wasn't where the giant was leading them, it was what he was leading them away from. The facial recognition software hummed steadily in advanced technology lab, processing thousands of images per second. Carter watched as the giant tourist's face was compared against international databases, each failed match increasing his anxiety. Then suddenly, the screen flashed green. Match found, announced Dr. Zhang, the head of digital forensics. 89.7% certainty. The name appeared on screen, Leonid Petrov. As his profile populated the display, Carter felt his understanding of the entire situation shift dramatically. Former military engineer for the Russian Special Forces, Dr. Zhang read aloud. But here's where it gets interesting. He went private sector 15 years ago. Started his own security consulting firm specializing in vulnerability assessment. Carter leaned closer to the screen, absorbing every detail of Petrov's history. His company, Mirror Shield Solutions, had an impressive client list: major banks, government facilities, even military installations. But they weren't hired to protect these places. They were hired to break in. He's a penetration tester, Carter realized, the pieces finally clicking into place. His job is to find security weaknesses before real criminals can exploit them. Commander Phillips pulled up additional files on Petrov. Look at his methodology. He specializes in something called full-spectrum vulnerability assessment. He doesn't just test physical security or cyber defenses, he tests how they work together. The team reviewed Petrov's past operations. In each case, his approach was the same. He would identify potential vulnerabilities, mark them discreetly, and then help organizations patch these weaknesses before they could be exploited. But why the elaborate show? Agent Reynolds questioned. Why not just approach security services directly? Because he's not working alone, Carter answered, studying a photograph of Petrov at a cybersecurity conference. Look at who's in the background of this image. The photos showed several known figures from the international intelligence community. They weren't just audience members, they were watching Petrov with focused attention. He's part of a larger network, Commander Phillips concluded. A private intelligence operation that works parallel to official channels. Dr. Zhang pulled up more recent data. In the past 3 years, Petrov's firm has been connected to preventing major security breaches in at least 12 countries. But here's the crucial part. They only reveal their involvement after the threat has been neutralized. Carter's mind raced back to the symbol on the palace bench. He's not marking targets for an attack, he said slowly. He's marking points that have already been compromised by someone else. The team quickly pulled up surveillance footage from other locations where Petrov's symbols had appeared. In each case, subsequent investigation had revealed pre-existing security vulnerabilities that had gone undetected by conventional security measures. Look at this pattern. Agent Reynolds pointed to a timeline of Petrov's known operations. He always appears 3 days before an attempted breach. Not because he's planning the attack, but because he knows it's coming, Carter finished. He's trying to warn us. The revelation sent the team into a flurry of activity. They began re-examining every piece of evidence from a new perspective. The map in the hotel room wasn't a target list, it was a warning about vulnerable points in London's financial infrastructure. The ultraviolet markings, Dr. Zhang observed. They're not alternate targets. They're showing us the connections between compromised systems. Commander Phillips received an urgent call. After a brief conversation, his face grew grave. We just got confirmation. 3 weeks ago, someone probed the security systems of 5 major financial institutions in London. The attacks were so subtle they almost went unnoticed. Almost? Carter asked. Someone did notice. Someone who specializes in finding patterns that everyone else misses. The team pulled up real-time security data from the marked locations. Sure enough, there were subtle anomalies in the network traffic, the kind that would only be visible if you knew exactly what to look for. Petrov found these breaches, Carter said. But instead of just reporting them, he's showing us how they're all connected. The question is, what's the larger picture he's trying to reveal? Dr. Zhang's computer chimed with a new alert. I've found something in his company's project history. 3 months ago, Mirror Shield Solutions began tracking a new type of cyber attack. They called it Project Echo, a sophisticated operation targeting financial centers across Europe. The pieces were falling into place. Petrov wasn't just identifying individual vulnerabilities, he was exposing a coordinated attack on the entire European financial system. His symbols weren't warnings about isolated incidents. They were pieces of a map showing how all these threats were connected. But why such an elaborate method? Agent Reynolds wondered. Why not just tell us directly? Because he doesn't know who he can trust, Carter realized. The complexity of these attacks suggests inside knowledge. By leaving these marks, he's ensuring the warning gets to everyone who needs to see it, without revealing who he's working with. Commander Phillips studied Petrov's profile one last time. So we've been chasing the person trying to prevent an attack, while the real threat has been growing right under our noses. Carter looked at the time. Less than 24 hours remained before whatever was coming reached its climax. They had finally identified Petrov, understood his mission, but one crucial question remained. If Petrov is on our side, Carter said, then who exactly is he working against? And more importantly, how do we stop them? The answer they were about to discover would shake the foundations of London's financial district and reveal a conspiracy more intricate than any of them had imagined. As the team rushed to reorient their investigation, Carter couldn't help but admire the brilliance of Petrov's strategy. He had turned himself into a conspicuous target, drawing attention and resources, all while leaving a trail of clues that only the right people would understand. Now the race was on to decode his final message before it was too late. The tension in the command center reached its peak when a secure line lit up, displaying a private number. Commander Phillips answered, putting it on speaker. A crisp, professional voice filled the room. This is Alexandra Novak from the International Cyber Defense Initiative. We understand you've been tracking Leonid Petrov's activities. Carter and the team exchanged glances as she continued. Petrov is one of our deep cover operatives. He's part of a global network that monitors and prevents large-scale cyber attacks before they happen. Why are you telling us this now? Commander Phillips demanded. Because in less than 3 hours, the largest cyber heist in history will be attempted on London's financial district. Petrov's warnings were meant to help us prepare. The team quickly pulled up the latest security data. Hidden beneath the normal traffic of London's financial networks, they found it. Subtle anomalies in data patterns, the kind that would be invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. The benchmarking wasn't just a warning, Carter realized. It was a timing signal. Petrov was telling us when the attack would begin. Alexandra's voice grew urgent. The attackers have compromised several key security nodes. They've been building this network for months, placing sleeper programs in strategic locations. The symbols Petrov left aren't just warnings. They're a map showing how the attackers plan to move through the system. As if on cue, alarms began blaring across multiple screens. We've got unauthorized access attempts at 3 different financial institutions, a technician announced. No, Carter corrected, studying the pattern. That's what they want us to think. Look at the data flow, these attacks are diversions. The real target is the central clearinghouse, Alexandra finished. If they gain control of those systems, they could potentially redirect billions in transactions. Petrov discovered their plan weeks ago but needed to maintain his cover while warning us. Commander Phillips mobilized every available resource. Cyber defense teams were deployed to critical locations. Physical security was enhanced at key infrastructure points. But Carter noticed something else in the data. These attack patterns. He pointed to the screen. They're identical to the path Petrov took through London yesterday. He wasn't just marking vulnerabilities, he was showing us exactly how the attackers would move. Alexandra confirmed his theory. That's why he made himself so visible. Each movement, each stop, every detail was choreographed to demonstrate the attack pattern. The benchmarking was the final piece, a countdown timer hidden in plain sight. Suddenly, the main financial database lit up with alerts. They're in the system, a technician announced. They're attempting to access the transaction protocols. No, Carter said firmly, a smile forming on his face. They're exactly where Petrov wanted them to be. The team watched in amazement as the attackers' carefully planned infiltration began to fall apart. At each point they tried to penetrate, they encountered newly strengthened security measures, implemented based on Petrov's warnings. Every backup plan they attempted had already been anticipated and countered. The mark on the bench, Carter explained, wasn't just showing us the vulnerability. It was telling us exactly how to trap them. Within minutes, the attack collapsed. The cyber defense teams isolated and contained the malicious code, while intelligence units traced the attack back to its source. What they found was staggering, a sophisticated criminal network that had been planning this heist for over a year. Petrov's work here is done, Alexandra informed them. He's already moved on to his next assignment. But he wanted you to know something, Officer Carter. Sometimes the best way to protect something isn't from behind walls, it's by letting the right people see the cracks. As the crisis wound down, Carter found himself back at his post outside the palace. The bench where it all started was still there, the subtle marking now removed. Tourists passed by, taking their photos, completely unaware of how close London's financial heart had come to disaster. A young child approached the bench, running his fingers along the wooden slats just as Petrov had done. But where Petrov had found vulnerability, the child found only the smooth surface of well-maintained wood. The weakness had been identified, the threat neutralized, all thanks to a giant tourist who wasn't a tourist at all. Commander Phillips joined Carter at his post. You know, he said thoughtfully, for every attack we prevent, there are probably dozens of others that never happen because of people like Petrov. Silent guardians who leave no trace except a few mysterious marks. Carter nodded, watching the crowds flow past. The best security isn't always the most visible, he replied. Sometimes it's just a subtle mark on a bench, left by someone who saw a weakness and decided to do something about it. As the sun set over London, Carter reflected on how one man's strange behavior had led them on a journey that ultimately prevented a massive financial catastrophe. Somewhere out there, Leonid Petrov was probably sitting on another bench, testing another security system, leaving another carefully crafted warning for those who knew how to read the signs. The world would never know how close it had come to financial chaos, and that was exactly the point. The true heroes of security weren't the ones who made the headlines. They were the ones who made sure there were no headlines to write. And so, the story of the giant tourists became another secret in London's vast tapestry of untold tales, known only to those who understood that sometimes the most important messages are hidden in the simplest marks, waiting for the right people to find them. As Carter resumed his stoic pose, he couldn't help but smile slightly. He now knew that somewhere in this city, and in cities across the world, silent guardians like Petrov were watching, testing, protecting, leaving nothing behind but a single carved mark and a mystery that only the right people would understand.